The great hall of the Galactic Council was filled with voices long before the meeting officially began. Representatives from dozens of worlds gathered around a massive circular chamber, each one trying to make sense of the latest reports about the Terran Empire. Ships moving in disputed sectors, new colonies rising in areas the Council believed were under shared governance, and silent responses from human diplomats who usually replied quickly to any message. For weeks, everyone felt something was building, but no one wanted to say it aloud. The counselors had gathered many times before, but this meeting felt different. The air carried a tension that even species without lungs could sense. There were no smiles, no small talk, and no interest in soft diplomatic phrases. Everyone in the room knew they were standing on the edge of something that could shape the future of the entire galaxy. A tall, silver-skinned representative from one of the older member worlds stood at the center platform. The glowing lights around the chamber dimmed slightly as the meeting began. The representative's voice echoed across the hall, calm yet sharply focused. He explained that the Terran Empire had crossed several territorial lines and refused to attend the last 3 diplomatic gatherings. Humans were expanding faster than anyone expected, building stations in regions that once took centuries to settle. Some species called it courage. Others called it recklessness. The Council, however, called it a threat to galactic balance. The speaker argued that if humanity continued its rapid expansion, no other power could compete with them in the coming decades. He insisted that the Council must take action before humanity became too strong to regulate. The chamber stirred with uneasy murmurs. A few of the younger species whispered that humanity might see such action as hostility. Others whispered that it did not matter. They believed humans had become bold enough to ignore the Council entirely. A representative from a world near the Terran border floated forward. His voice quivered as he explained that several of his colony ships had gone missing near human-claimed space. No evidence linked the disappearances to the Terran Empire, but fear made assumptions easy. For him, and others like him, humanity had become too unpredictable, too mysterious, and too ambitious. He argued that the Council had to send a clear warning that even the Terran Empire must respect shared laws. This sparked an immediate reaction. A few delegates strongly disagreed. They said that humans expanded not through conquest, but through determination and resourcefulness. They reminded everyone how humanity worked with others during disaster relief missions, and how they often shared technology that boosted development across dozens of species. They warned that labeling humans as a danger could backfire, but their voices were drowned out by louder, more fearful ones. One representative raised a hand and said the Council had no choice but to act. Another claimed that humanity only respected actions, not warnings. Another said humans were always bold when pushed, and that boldness had to be controlled. With each comment, the chamber slid further toward the same conclusion. In the center of the room, a red holographic map expanded into view. It showed disputed sectors, recent Terran movements, and projected population growth. The numbers were startling. Humanity was spreading faster than any species before them. The map painted a future where the Terran Empire could match or even surpass the combined fleets of several Council member states. The silver-skinned representative seized on this moment. He announced that waiting any longer would be a mistake. He suggested an ultimatum. Humanity must halt all further expansion, dismantle several of its frontier fleets, withdraw from disputed areas, and submit to galactic inspection teams. If the Terran Empire agreed, peace would be maintained. If they refused, the Council would have justification to apply corrective force. The words hung in the air like cold metal. Several delegates exchanged looks of worry. They knew humans were proud and resistant to control. Giving them an ultimatum might spark the very conflict the Council feared. But fear often pushes reason aside, and fear was spreading through the hall faster than calm voices could stop it. representative from a peaceful agricultural world, tried one last time to speak. She said the council should send a request for dialogue, not a demand. She argued that humans reacted strongly to pressure, and that forcing them into a corner might lead to dangerous outcomes. But her voice, gentle and rational, was ignored in the wave of rising urgency. The debate went on for hours. Some shouted. Some demanded stronger action. Some tried to mediate, but were drowned out. By the time the session was close to ending, it was clear the majority had made their decision. Humanity's silence in recent weeks had been interpreted as defiance. Few wanted to wait to find out whether that silence actually meant danger. The final vote was taken through glowing panels that lit up, one by one across the chamber. The colors shifted quickly as representatives made their choices. Anyone watching could see the decision forming long before the last panel lit. When the tally reached its conclusion, the silver-skinned representative stepped forward one more time. He announced that the verdict was clear. The Galactic Council would issue an ultimatum to the Terran Empire effective immediately. Humanity must comply with the Council's terms or face the consequences. Every representative heard the words, yet none fully understood what they had just set in motion. A broadcast was prepared within minutes. Messages were translated into dozens of languages. A grand statement was recorded, expressing the Council's concern and its demand for compliance. It was formal, polished, and delivered with the confidence of a group that believed it was acting for the greater good. The ultimatum spread across space through countless communication channels, making its way to every human station, ship, and colony. And then there was silence. Not a single human leader responded. No diplomat appeared on any channel. No clarification message came. No outrage, no apology, not even a technical acknowledgement of receipt. The Council expected fear. They expected negotiations. They expected urgent calls asking for compromise. Instead, they received nothing. The silence felt heavier than any angry reply. Many representatives felt a cold weight settle inside them. Though none admitted it, the silver-skinned speaker tried to calm the hall, suggesting that humanity was likely gathering its leaders to discuss the ultimatum. But the uneasy expressions around the chamber told a different story. The representatives had dealt with humans before. Silence was not usually their way. Something about this stillness felt wrong. On distant worlds, advisors and observers noticed small but unsettling patterns. Terran civilian traffic began shifting routes. Human research networks went dark. Frontier outposts activated defensive protocols without announcing a reason. Everything happened quietly, smoothly, and without public explanation. The Council was confused, but more importantly, they felt the first touch of doubt. That doubt spread through the chamber as news from border worlds trickled in. Human logistics channels were reorganizing. Freight lanes usually full of chatter now carried only encrypted pulses. Routine messages from Terran ambassadors were missing. Every sign suggested that humanity knew something the Council didn't. As the hall emptied at the end of the meeting, many representatives walked out with confidence, convinced they had made the right choice. But a few paused at the exit, looking back at the quiet chamber. They wondered what the Terran Empire was truly thinking. They wondered if the ultimatum had been a mistake. They wondered if humanity's silence was not fear, but preparation. And far beyond the Council Hall, on worlds and stations glowing under human banners, something was indeed happening, something quiet, deliberate, and far more organized than anyone in the Council expected. The Council had given its ultimatum. Now they waited. But humanity was not waiting. Humanity was getting ready. The Terran Empire did not react the way the Galactic Council expected. When the ultimatum was sent across space, most species imagined humans would rush to respond, ask questions, or try to negotiate. That was the usual way humans dealt with pressure. They argued, they debated, They pushed back with words long before anyone pushed with force. But this time, none of that happened. Their silence was complete, and it spread across the galaxy like a quiet storm dot inside the Terran Empire's central worlds. Things did not slow down. In fact, everything sped up in a way that looked almost planned. Human communication networks, normally busy and loud, shifted into a more controlled pattern. Civilian messages were rerouted through new channels, and military communication took priority without any public announcement. It was done smoothly, almost invisibly, like a machine suddenly changing gears without making a sound. Workers in the orbital stations began receiving coded messages. These messages were short and direct, telling them to secure systems, update shields, and prepare long-range scanners for higher-level monitoring. No one complained. Everyone sensed that something big was happening, even if they didn't know what. Human society had always been good at adapting quickly, but this time the speed was unusual, even for them. In frontier colonies, where people lived close to unexplored space, a faint tension hung in the air. Colony leaders received encrypted briefings that told them to activate silent protocols. These protocols reduced non-essential communication and increased security around energy plants, food storage units, and transport docks. It was all done without panic. People helped each other reinforce buildings, check supplies, and ensure transport vehicles were ready in case evacuation became necessary. Many colonists didn't know the details of the ultimatum yet, but they felt the shift in atmosphere. Something about the sudden order made them realize that the Empire had been expecting trouble long before the Council even announced its decision. Deep within the Terran Defense Network, analysts worked in near-complete silence. Screens displayed moving dots that represented ships, satellites, and unknown objects near the borders. They were monitoring everything: Council fleets, neutral traders, stray signals, and even abandoned outposts. Every suspicious movement was recorded and reviewed. What surprised many of the junior analysts was how calm their commanders were. There was no shouting, no panic, no rushing. Instead, the senior officers looked like they had been waiting for this exact situation. Some even whispered among themselves that the Council had walked directly into a trap without even knowing it. But most analysts did not try to guess. They simply followed orders. High above a blue-white world near the frontier, a large Terran station adjusted its orbit. The station redirected its solar arrays, increased its power output, and activated long-range defensive grids. From the outside, it looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But inside, soldiers and engineers moved quickly, installing new shield modules and checking weapon controls. The atmosphere was steady, focused, and strangely quiet. On another side of the galaxy, in a distant mining colony, workers were told to bring all robotic equipment inside storage hangars. This was unusual, because those robots normally operated 24 hours a day. One miner, who had worked there for years, said the last time such an order was given was during a massive solar storm. But this time, there was no natural disaster. There was only the knowledge that the Council had given their empire an ultimatum. Even though the population didn't know the full details, they trusted their leaders. That trust came from history. Humans had faced crises before: planetary disasters, interstellar plagues, pirate invasions, political conflicts. Each time, they responded by uniting, not breaking apart. It was one of the reasons many species respected them, even when they pretended not to. Meanwhile, far from the border worlds, the central command building in one of the Terran core planets glowed crimson inside. This color meant only one thing: strategic mode. The highest-ranking officials gathered in a sealed chamber. The doors locked behind them with a heavy sound, and no one outside could listen to their discussion. Inside the chamber, they reviewed every detail of the Council's ultimatum. The officials did not appear shocked. Instead, They seemed annoyed more than anything else. One official leaned back in his chair and said that the council had made a predictable move. Another noted that humanity had warned them multiple times not to interfere with their expansion efforts. A third person, usually quiet, stated that the council had finally crossed a line they should never have crossed. Their conversation was intense, but calm. No one raised their voice. No one suggested surrender. Not a single person even considered accepting the ultimatum. They knew exactly what it meant. The Galactic Council did not want negotiation. They wanted control. Across the Empire, the silent response continued. Human universities paused their interplanetary research programs. Military academies recalled their top cadets. Diplomatic branches went offline temporarily, leaving automated messages behind. Most people assumed this was preparation for something serious, but they didn't know how serious it was. In deep space transport routes, captains of large Terran cargo ships were ordered to change course, avoiding council-monitored zones. These captains did not question the new instructions. They simply adjusted their ships and continued their journey. Some of them whispered among their crews, wondering how long the quiet tension would last. One transport crew described the feeling like the calm before a huge storm, even though there were no storms in space. Another crew member said that the silence felt louder than any warning alarm. Back in the council territories, confusion grew. Observers from different species watched the sudden shift in Terran activity and didn't know what to make of it. Their sensors showed movement, but nothing aggressive. It was controlled, planned, and carefully executed. Some council analysts began to worry that humanity had been preparing for a scenario like this for years. And if that was true, then the ultimatum might not weaken the Terran Empire, it might strengthen it instead. On one council world, a low-ranking diplomat tried to send a message requesting a peaceful dialogue with the Terran Empire. The message was blocked by senior officials. They said humanity must respond to the ultimatum before any conversation could happen. But deep inside, even they were not confident. The days passed, and the silence remained. But the silence was not empty. It was full of movement, preparation, and quiet coordination. Meanwhile, down in a small human settlement on a tiny moon, a group of children asked their teacher why the communication screens were showing alerts. The teacher smiled softly and told them that sometimes adults disagreed on big topics, and when that happened, people prepared to stay safe. It was a simple answer, but enough to keep the children calm. Adults, however, were not calm. Workers whispered in hallways. Scientists reviewed emergency research backups. Engineers stood in long lines to get their new assignments. Farmers near core planets stored extra food and increased production. Every part of society shifted toward readiness. Yet through all of this, humanity did not speak a single word to the Galactic Council. The silence created pressure across the galaxy. Some species began to worry that the Terran Empire was planning something too big, something the Council had no idea how to handle. Others hoped humans were simply ignoring the ultimatum. But most members of the Council felt uneasy, even if they tried hard not to show it. The truth was simple but dangerous. The Terran Empire had made up its mind long before the Council issued the ultimatum. They had known this day would come. They had seen the fear growing among the Council's members, and they knew that sooner or later, someone would try to restrict their rise. So they prepared. They prepared so thoroughly that the ultimatum felt like nothing more than a small wave hitting a massive wall. And while the Council waited anxiously for a response, humanity moved quietly, strongly, and confidently toward a path only they understood. The silence was not weakness. It was the first warning. The Galactic Council expected that after a few days of silence, humanity would finally speak. They assumed the Terran Empire was simply gathering its leaders, preparing a diplomatic answer, or deciding how strongly to argue back. Many believed that humans would panic once they understood how serious the ultimatum was. Others believed that humans would try to bargain, offering compromises to settle the issue peacefully. But nothing like that happened. Instead, silence stretched on, and the council realized that humanity was not ignoring them by accident. They were ignoring them on purpose. Inside the council hall, tension grew with each passing hour. The giant circular chamber felt heavier than usual. Delegates moved slower, spoke less, and avoided looking at each other. Everyone sensed something shifting in the galaxy, something bigger than any speech or treaty they had ever written. The council met again on the 5th day after the ultimatum was sent. Representatives gathered early, filling the chamber with hushed conversations. No one was talking openly about fear, but fear lived in the air like a cold mist. It clung to every species, every voice, every quiet glance toward the glowing screens that monitored the Terran Empire. The silver-skinned representative who had pushed hardest for the ultimatum sat quietly this time. His confidence had faded. He kept tapping his finger on the edge of the table, waiting for reports that might calm the uneasiness spreading through the hall. When the reports finally came, they did not calm anyone. A nervous analyst stepped forward and played a projection showing recent Terran activity. Human fleets had not moved toward any council borders. There were no aggressive advances, no sudden military expansions, no new colonies in disputed territories. Everything seemed normal on the surface. But behind that surface, the Terran Empire had changed. Supply routes were reorganized in perfect formation. Civilian ships were traveling with higher coordination than ever before. Human outposts and stations were activating defensive systems quietly, efficiently, as if rehearsing a coup. Procedure they had practiced many times. One delegate whispered that humans looked like a storm, preparing faraway silent, but impossible to ignore. The silver-skinned representative tried to reassure the hall. He claimed this was a good sign, that humanity was simply preparing to comply with the ultimatum. But the words sounded weak, even to him. The chamber remained quiet. Then a representative from a council world near Terran space floated forward, looking pale and uncertain. He reported that his government had detected unusual energy readings from human stations. These readings didn't match any known weapon or shield pattern. They were unfamiliar, powerful, and controlled. His voice trembled as he admitted that his world had never seen such signals before. The chamber erupted into whispers. Some delegates leaned forward, alarmed. Others muttered that the Terran Empire had been developing secret technology. A few claimed the council should have acted sooner. The noise grew, turning into a messy mixture of fear, blame, and frustration. A representative from a distant world tried to calm everyone. He said the readings might not be weapons. They could be defensive upgrades or research experiments. He reminded the hall that humanity often developed new technology faster than anyone else, sometimes without explaining it. But while he tried to sound confident, even he could not shake off the uneasiness in his voice. The debate grew louder. Someone said the Terran Empire should have been stopped years ago. Someone else said the ultimatum was too harsh and would only provoke conflict. Another representative shouted that the council had overstepped its authority and was now facing the consequences. Slowly, disagreements began to split the hall into two main groups. One group believed that humanity was becoming too powerful and needed to be controlled before they surpassed the council. Completely, the other group believed that the ultimatum had been a grave mistake, and that humanity's silence was a warning that the council had pushed them too. Far-out members of the second group insisted that the council should withdraw the ultimatum before it was too late. They argued that humans were loyal allies in the past, and that treating them like criminals would only destroy what little trust remained. But the first group refused to back down. They claimed that if the Council seemed weak now, they would lose authority over the entire galaxy. They said that the Terran Empire must show they were willing to obey rules, or else every species would start expanding without permission. The argument became so heated that one representative stood up and punched the table with a loud crack. The sound silenced the chamber, but only for a moment. Soon the voices rose again, sharper and more desperate. A senior council advisor stepped forward, calling for quiet. She said the galaxy was watching and that the council needed unity. But unity was slipping away like sand through fingers. The more she spoke of peace, the more the chamber divided. Even species that were usually calm and neutral began choosing sides. A representative from a peaceful farming world broke down and said her planet could not survive a war with the Terran Empire. She begged the Council to reconsider the ultimatum. Others from similar worlds supported her, trembling at the idea of human fleets turning their attention toward Council space. But those from militaristic worlds mocked their fear, claiming that humanity was only strong because the Council allowed them to grow. They insisted that if the Council used its full combined power, they could force the Terran Empire into compliance. A representative from a merchant world stepped in and warned that trade with humans made up a large part of the galactic economy. If the Council provoked them, thousands of worlds would suffer financially. But no one listened to him either. The hall slowly became a battlefield of words. The once united Council was now breaking apart in front of its own members. While this chaos unfolded, an assistant rushed into the chamber carrying an urgent message. The silence that followed her entry was heavy. All eyes turned toward her as she activated the message. The projection showed a Terran colony ship changing its course away from Council-monitored space. The ship was not behaving aggressively. It was avoiding conflict, staying clear of any Council presence. But the message also showed something else behind that colony ship. Several Terran escort vessels were traveling in perfect formation, protecting it with an unmistakable sense of preparation. The message ended, leaving the hall frozen. One representative whispered, "Why would they need escort ships if they were planning peace?" Another whispered, "Why are they reorganizing everything so calmly?" The silver-skinned representative finally spoke again. His voice was quieter this time, almost uncertain. He said that humanity was sending a message without speaking. Their actions were not random. They were calculated, precise, and disciplined. Far across the hall, a representative from a technologically advanced world whispered a frightening thought. What if the Terran Empire expected the ultimatum? What if they planned for it years ago? The idea fell into the center of the chamber like a stone into a still lake, sending ripples through everyone. Suddenly, everything made sense. Their silence, their controlled preparations, their new defensive systems, their sudden calm. The Terran Empire had not been caught off guard. They had been waiting. This realization changed everything. Delegates who once supported the ultimatum now questioned it. Those who opposed it grew more desperate, insisting that the Council back down before humanity chose a path no one could stop. But the Council was divided beyond repair. There was no longer a clear majority. Some worlds began pulling funding from Council projects, refusing to support any action against humans. Others threatened to leave the Council entirely. If the ultimatum was withdrawn, the chamber had become a mirror of the galaxy itself, fractured, anxious and uncertain. As the meeting dragged on, the urgency in the room grew heavier. Delegates began to understand that the ultimatum had not only challenged the Terran Empire, it had exposed the weaknesses. Inside the Council itself, unity was collapsing, respect was fading, fear was rising, and humanity had not even spoken yet. For almost 2 weeks, the Terran Empire remained silent, and that silence felt heavier than any fleet the Council had ever seen. The galaxy didn't understand why humanity wasn't responding. Some species thought humans were scared. Others believed they were planning something. Many hoped the Terran Empire would eventually give in and accept the ultimatum. But everyone sensed one truth. The longer humans stayed quiet, the more the balance of power shifted. Then, on a calm evening across most council worlds, everything changed. The Terran Empire finally spoke. The message began without warning. A steady pulse appeared on communication screens across the galaxy. Ships stopped mid-journey to watch. Stations paused their work. Even council soldiers froze when the signal appeared. It wasn't a loud or threatening message. In fact, it was surprisingly soft, almost too soft for the tension that had been building. A single human envoy appeared on the screen, standing in a simple room with a calm expression. The background showed no flag, no military decoration, no sign of arrogance. He looked ordinary, like any worker or teacher you'd see on a human world. That alone made the message feel even more powerful, because it made humanity's response feel grounded, not dramatic. For several seconds, the envoy said nothing. He simply looked straight ahead, as if measuring the entire galaxy with his eyes. Then he spoke, and his voice carried across millions of communication channels. He said the Terran Empire had received the ultimatum. He said humanity had reviewed the Council's demands. And he said that Earth and its colonies had one clear answer. They would not accept any forced oversight or restrictions on their future. The words were calm, steady, and controlled. There was no anger, no shouting, no threats. Just clarity. The envoy explained that the Council's ultimatum was based on fear, not reason. He reminded them how humanity had stood with dozens of species during disasters, wars, and crises. He told them that humans had shared medical knowledge, energy technology, and emergency supplies without expecting anything in return. And yet now, after everything, the Council had chosen to treat them like a problem to be contained. His voice didn't shake, but the silence around him was louder than anything. He said humanity had always believed in cooperation, but not control. He said no empire, no matter how powerful, had the right to dictate the future of another civilization. And he said that if the Council insisted on forcing humanity to obey, then the Terran Empire would defend itself with all necessary measures. The phrase was vague, but every species felt its weight. Only then did the human envoy show what the Terran Empire had really been doing during its silence. A large projection appeared behind him. It wasn't a weapon, a bomb, or a fleet. It was a network, an enormous map of interconnected energy fields, defensive grids, shield systems, and stabilizer arrays stretching across human space. They weren't pointing at the Council. They were protecting human borders. This was humanity's silent answer. They had prepared years ago, long before any ultimatum was issued. The envoy explained that these systems had been built to prevent invasions, protect trade routes, and keep colonies safe. They weren't weapons aimed outward. They were shields aimed inward, forming an unbreakable barrier around the Terran Empire. He said the Council had underestimated humanity's ability to prepare. They had seen humans grow, explore, and build, but they had never realized just how far ahead humans were thinking. Many Council delegates, watching the message, felt something cold settle in their stomachs. Humanity wasn't acting like a nation caught off guard. They were acting like a nation that had been expecting this exact confrontation. The envoy's calm voice continued, explaining that the Terran Empire would not attack unless attacked first. But if the Council attempted to enforce their ultimatum or send any inspection fleets, the Terran Empire would treat it as an act of aggression. He repeated this without raising his voice, making the warning feel even more serious. Across the galaxy, reactions were immediate. On Council worlds, public screens played the human message again and again. while citizens whispered nervously in streets and markets. Some feared humans were planning war. Others felt relieved that the Terran Empire wasn't threatening to attack. A few brave voices even questioned why the Council had pushed humanity in the first place. In the Council chamber itself, the message caused chaos. Representatives shouted over one another. Some accused humanity of arrogance. Others accused the Council of provoking them. Several species demanded an immediate withdrawal of the ultimatum, claiming the Council had gone too far. A few stubborn leaders insisted that backing down would make the Council look weak. The silver-skinned representative who originally proposed the ultimatum stood stiffly, his expression frozen. He hadn't expected this. He never imagined the Terran Empire had built such a massive defensive network. He had believed humans were growing too fast, but he didn't think they had the technology or coordination for something so complex. He was wrong. While the hall argued, another projection appeared. It showed updated scans from the Terran frontier. Human stations were glowing with new energy signatures. Human fleets were organizing into defensive patterns with perfect precision. And human communication networks were operating at levels the Council's experts had never seen before. For the first time, the Council realized the truth. Humanity wasn't preparing for war. They were prepared. They had been prepared long before the Council even agreed on the ultimatum. The fracture inside the Council widened. Worlds that relied on trade with humans began to panic, fearing the economic impact of conflict. Peaceful species begged the Council leaders to de-escalate. Militaristic species demanded a show of force. Some representatives tried to deny reality. They said the Terran Empire must be bluffing. They said no one could build such technology in secret. They insisted the Council had the right to set limits, but the galaxy wasn't listening to them anymore. As the Terran message spread, several smaller species quietly announced they would not support any aggression against the Terran Empire. They didn't trust the Council's judgment anymore. They didn't want their people dragged into a war. Even some larger member states hesitated. They reviewed their military strength, their fleet condition, their energy reserves, and their political stability. Many realized they were nowhere near ready for a conflict with humanity. Not after seeing the Terran defensive network. Some delegates privately admitted that if humanity truly wanted to expand, no one could stop them. The ultimatum was worthless now. It had collapsed the moment the envoy finished speaking. The message wasn't angry. It wasn't full of threats. It was simply confident. Confident enough that many Council worlds began to see the Terran Empire differently, not as an upstart power, but as a mature one. Later that night, across thousands of light years, humans gathered in homes, stations, and colonies to talk about the envoy's message. Many felt relieved to see their leaders speak up. Others felt proud that humanity was standing strong without acting aggressive. People hugged their families, shared food with neighbors, and talked about how far humanity had come. Fear existed. Of course, it always does when conflict is possible. But support for the Terran Empire's stance was overwhelming. Back in the Council, the silver-skinned representative watched all of this unfold with a sinking feeling. He realized that the ultimatum had not weakened the Terran Empire. It had strengthened them. It had unified them. And it had exposed the Council's internal divisions for all to see. He understood something he didn't want to admit. They had misread humanity completely. Humans were not a reckless species. They were a patient species. And that patience had just reshaped the entire galaxy. After the Terran envoy's message, the Galactic Council began to crumble from the inside. The ultimatum they had worked so hard to craft, the one they believed would show humanity its place in the galaxy, suddenly seemed meaningless. In meeting halls across the Council, delegates argued endlessly, but their voices carried less weight now. The silence of humanity had turned into a mirror, reflecting the Council's fear and indecision. Many species had expected a response filled with anger or panic, perhaps even a visible display of force. They had imagined human fleets mobilizing aggressively, colonies preparing for battle, or at least a flurry of diplomatic appeals. Instead, the Terran Empire had done something no one could ignore. It had shown preparedness without aggression, confidence without arrogance. They had not raised a sword, yet the Council felt the power of it all the same. Inside the main chamber, representatives were visibly shaken. Some tried to argue that the Terran Empire's message was only a bluff, a clever show of strength to frighten the galaxy. Others admitted quietly to their aides that it did not feel like a bluff. The systems, the fleets, the coordinated defensive grids, all of it spoke of years of careful planning and unparalleled discipline. The Council could not deny it. Humanity had anticipated every possible move and countermove. Delegates from smaller, peaceful worlds were the first to speak out. They had always been cautious, wary of conflict, and deeply dependent on trade with Terran colonies. These representatives demanded that the Council retract the ultimatum before any more harm could come to innocent worlds. They pointed out that the Council's credibility had already suffered because of the misstep, and continuing to push could risk losing allies permanently. Others, especially from militaristic worlds, tried to argue that backing down now would make the Council look weak. They insisted that humanity had been tested, and that failure to enforce the ultimatum would encourage rebellion from other member states. They claimed that the Council's authority must be upheld, even if it meant risking confrontation. But their voices were fewer, and their confidence had wavered after seeing Terran preparations. The debates continued for days. Reports came in from border sectors, where Terran fleets moved with careful precision, and from distant colonies, where defensive grids were fully operational. Observers confirmed that humanity's preparation was not a temporary measure. It was a long-term network designed to protect millions of lives and ensure stability in human space. Every Council representative who reviewed these reports began to understand one undeniable fact: the Terran Empire had grown beyond the point where intimidation or threats could influence it. Inside the chamber, whispers of panic and doubt began spreading. Representatives started questioning whether the Council had misjudged humanity for decades. Some admitted that humans had been underestimated, their patience mistaken for weakness, their determination mistaken for recklessness. The realization was uncomfortable, even terrifying. The Council had assumed they could control human expansion, but now it was clear that humans were self-directed, confident, and willing to defend their freedom at all costs. A turning point came when a representative from a neutral world spoke. Their voice, calm but firm, suggested that the Council take a step back and reconsider. They said that the Terran Empire's message was not a threat, but a statement of strength and self-determination. Instead of continuing to challenge humanity, the Council should engage in open dialogue based on mutual respect. This approach, they argued, would prevent unnecessary conflict and maintain stability across the galaxy. At first, many dismissed this advice. They believed that compromise would only embolden humanity. But as days passed, more delegates quietly agreed with the sentiment. They realized that forcing compliance was no longer an option. Humanity was prepared, united, and unwavering, and any attempt to confront them would not only fail, but also weaken the Council's own credibility. Reports from Terran worlds continued to pour in. Citizens were calm, confident, and supportive of their leader's decision. Colonists were not panicking. Engineers were upgrading defensive systems, and fleets moved in coordinated formations, practicing drills and securing supply lines. Every part of human society contributed to a display of preparedness that required no violence. Their readiness was visible, yet understated, like a quiet storm gathering strength. Council analysts also noted that humanity's approach had a psychological effect. Their calm, deliberate preparation sent a message without aggression. It demonstrated strength and confidence without firing a shot, and it reminded the galaxy that humans were not impulsive. They were patient, strategic, and capable of extraordinary coordination. The Council had tried to provoke fear and compliance, but humanity had responded in a way that commanded respect instead. The pressure inside the Council continued to grow. Delegates from worlds dependent on trade with humans argued that economic collapse would be inevitable if conflict erupted. Merchant planets threatened to withdraw resources and alliances if the Council pushed the Terran Empire further. Even militaristic worlds began to question whether they were strong enough to oppose a prepared Terran Empire, particularly one that had no interest in aggression, but would defend itself decisively if provoked. Some of the more cautious Council leaders started to speak openly about retreat. They acknowledged that humanity had been underestimated, that the ultimatum was based on fear rather than understanding, and that the only way forward was negotiation. Others nodded in agreement, realizing that it was better to preserve alliances and maintain peace than to risk confrontation with a civilization that had already proven it could act with precision, patience, and unity. Eventually, the Council reached a reluctant consensus. The ultimatum could not be enforced, and it could not continue to be used as a measure of authority. Member states slowly withdrew their support. Statements were released to the galaxy, explaining that the Council had miscalculated, and that a new approach would be required to work with the Terran Empire. Some states offered formal apologies, while others quietly acknowledged their error without public statements. The collapse of the ultimatum was complete. In human worlds, the news was met with relief and quiet satisfaction. Citizens understood that the Council had tried to impose limits on their expansion, and had failed. They celebrated the resilience of their leaders and the unity of their society, but they did so without arrogance. Humans had won not through aggression, but through preparedness, patience, and careful planning. The Terran Empire had demonstrated that power could be measured not only by fleets or weapons, but by coordination, strategy, and the ability to act without haste. In the aftermath, Council representatives reflected on their mistakes. They realized that humanity's growth and success were natural results of determination, intelligence, and adaptability. Attempts to control them had failed because humans were not reckless. They were disciplined. They did not act out of fear, and they did not react impulsively. Every action, every preparation, and every silence had been deliberate, measured, and strategic. The collapse of the ultimatum also revealed a deeper truth. The Council itself had vulnerabilities. Internal disagreements, lack of foresight, and reliance on intimidation had weakened their authority. Humanity's calm response had exposed these flaws, forcing the Council to confront its own weaknesses before it could hope to influence anyone again. Across the galaxy, smaller species quietly reassessed their relationships with the Terran Empire. They realized that humans could be trusted partners, not enemies, if treated with respect. Trade agreements were quietly renewed, and diplomatic channels reopened. Humans had demonstrated strength without threat, resilience without aggression, and leadership without dominance. Even within the Council, voices of caution and humility began to rise. Some representatives admitted that they had misjudged humanity for years. They acknowledged that patience, preparation, and intelligence were more powerful than force or intimidation. These insights slowly began to shape a new approach to galactic diplomacy, one that recognized humanity as an equal partner rather than a problem to be contained. The collapse of the ultimatum also left a lasting impression on human society. Citizens across planets and colonies felt a renewed sense of unity and purpose. They understood that their patience and careful planning had protected them, not force or aggression. Communities celebrated quietly, focusing on the achievements of collective effort and the strength of preparation. It was a moment of pride without hubris, confidence without arrogance, and victory without conflict. The galaxy had witnessed a turning point. The Council's attempt to impose control had failed. Humanity had proven that silence, preparation, and coordination could speak louder than threats. The collapse of the Ultimatum marked a new era, one where the Terran Empire was not only recognized as a major power, but also respected as a society that valued strategy, patience, and collective effort over impulsive aggression. By the time the Council began planning its next steps, the Terran Empire had already moved forward. Defensive systems remained active, fleets continued coordinated patrols, and colonies were secure. Humanity had not attacked, nor had they shown hostility. They had simply stood firm, prepared, and ready. The message was clear. The Terran Empire would. With the collapse of the Ultimatum, the galaxy began to change in ways no one had fully expected. For decades, the Council had been seen as the ultimate authority, the body that regulated expansion, trade, and conflict among the stars. Yet, humanity's calm and prepared response had shown that power was not just about fleets, rules, or fear. It was about strategy, unity, and the ability to act decisively without panic. The Terran Empire had not attacked, and yet it had shifted the balance of influence across the galaxy simply by standing firm. Inside the council chambers, the atmosphere was tense, uneasy, and uncertain. Representatives who had previously advocated for a hard stance found themselves silenced by the weight of events. Those who had opposed the Ultimatum now had confidence to speak openly. The divisions that had grown during the weeks of debate were no longer hidden. They were public, obvious, and damaging to the Council's authority. Leaders realized that the galaxy had seen through their attempt at control, and that credibility was not something easily repaired. Delegates from smaller worlds began pushing for dialogue with the Terran Empire. They recognized that humans were not seeking to dominate or attack others, and they argued that diplomacy should be rebuilt on mutual respect. Some of the older, wiser representatives noted that the Council itself had learned a valuable lesson. That respect, not intimidation, was the foundation for sustainable relationships across civilizations. The more the Council discussed this, the clearer it became that the old methods of enforcement no longer applied. Humanity had set a new standard. Across Terran space, citizens were quietly observing the galaxy's reactions. In homes, schools, and workstations, people discussed the collapse of the Ultimatum. They shared stories of how their leaders had acted with calm precision, without threatening anyone, yet protecting every world, colony, and citizen under Terran control. They understood that their society's strength lay not only in technology and organization, but in patience, unity, and careful planning. Parents explained to children that power was as much about wisdom as it was about weapons, and that cooperation and preparation could often achieve more than aggression. In frontier colonies, where humans had once been nervous about the Council's reach, relief spread quietly but deeply. Supply chains and transport routes returned to normal. Defensive systems remained active, and local leaders reassured citizens that nothing had been lost, only gained. Communities celebrated in small ways, not with grand parades or displays of arrogance, but through shared meals, work, and stories of how humanity had faced a challenge together. Pride in their civilization's foresight and resilience became the new common bond. The Terran leadership took care to maintain a calm, measured presence. They understood that arrogance or overconfidence could undo the goodwill they had earned. Instead, they sent envoys and communications that emphasized stability, cooperation, and mutual respect. Humanity had not won because of aggression. They had won because they had shown the galaxy that they could protect themselves while remaining reasonable, disciplined, and humane. Council members soon realized that the Terran Empire's approach had changed the very rules of engagement across the galaxy. No longer could intimidation or ultimatums be used to force compliance. Civilizations that once relied on threats too. Control borders now had to recognize that patience, planning, and unity could outweigh even the most powerful fleets. Humanity's success had rewritten the expectations of diplomacy, negotiation, and conflict prevention. Even militaristic worlds, which had been skeptical of humans from the beginning, began reconsidering their approach. Some quietly reviewed their fleets, technology, and defensive networks. They recognized that a prepared, patient, and disciplined civilization could not be rushed or bullied. Diplomacy, strategy, and mutual respect now seemed more effective than imposing force. Council generals admitted privately that any attempt to control the Terran Empire would require unprecedented preparation, and even then, success was far from guaranteed. Trade networks that had been disrupted by tension slowly reopened. Many worlds recognized that economic stability depended on maintaining strong relations with humanity. Merchants celebrated quietly, arranging agreements and supply chains that would strengthen both Terran colonies and Council worlds. The collapse of the Ultimatum had not only secured safety, it had demonstrated that cooperation could be more productive than conflict. Human diplomats carefully coordinated trade agreements without claiming dominance, proving that strength could coexist with fairness. At the heart of the Terran Empire, leaders reflected on the weeks of tension and preparation. They discussed the lessons learned and the paths forward. One conclusion was clear. Humanity had shown its ability to act as a united, strategic civilization. Another was equally clear. Diplomacy and patience had been just as important as technology and fleets. Every action had been deliberate, every measure carefully calculated. The collapse of the Council's ultimatum was not the end of conflict, it was the proof that preparation and wisdom could achieve far more than threats ever could. In the Council, debates shifted. Instead of insisting on control, many representatives began discussing new frameworks for cooperation. They acknowledged that humanity's approach had set a standard that could not be ignored. Negotiation, trade, shared security agreements, and mutual respect became the new language. Leaders realized that attempting to dominate a prepared civilization was not only futile, it was dangerous. Humanity had demonstrated that they would not bow to intimidation, and this awareness changed how every species thought about power. Across human colonies, ordinary citizens experienced a sense of quiet pride. Teachers explained to children that society had succeeded because people had prepared carefully, acted responsibly, and remained united. Engineers shared stories of the defensive systems they had built. Farmers spoke of the food reserves that ensured survival. Workers described the way fleets had moved in formation. In every story, the lesson was clear. Careful planning, cooperation, and patience were as powerful as any weapon. Meanwhile, the Council quietly began to restore relations. Small envoys traveled to Terran worlds to discuss trade, science, and security agreements. No one tried to impose authority. Humanity responded with openness, sharing knowledge and technology, while clearly stating that they would not accept control or restrictions. The relationship between humans and the Council shifted from tension to cautious respect, with the understanding that cooperation was preferable to confrontation. In distant worlds observing these developments, younger species took note. They realized that growth, intelligence, and patience could outmatch intimidation. They watched humans coordinate without panic, prepare without aggression, and stand firm without hostility. It became a lesson in diplomacy and strategy, one that would be studied for generations. By the time several cycles of planning and diplomacy passed, the galaxy had entered a new era. The Terran Empire was respected as a capable, prepared, and patient civilization. The Council had regained some credibility, but it was tempered by humility. Lessons of patience, preparation, and respect were now being taught, not just to council members, but across species in schools, academies, and diplomatic institutions. The collapse of the ultimatum had created a model for how civilizations could interact without immediate conflict, and humanity had set the example. Back on human worlds, life continued. Citizens returned to daily routines, schools reopened, transport resumed, and colonies thrived. People remembered the tension, the waiting, and the silent preparations, but they did not celebrate in boastful ways. Instead, they reflected on the strength of unity, the power of patience, and the importance of preparation. Humanity had faced an external challenge without resorting to aggression, and the galaxy had watched it succeed. The final lesson of the collapse was clear. Respect is earned through action, unity, and preparation, not fear or force. The Terran Empire had reshaped the galaxy's understanding of strength. They had proven that diplomacy, patience, and strategic planning could be more powerful than weapons, threats, or ultimatums. Humanity's calm response, combined with careful preparation, had not only secured their future, but also taught the galaxy a lesson that would endure for generations. The Terran Empire now looked outward, confident in its place in the galaxy. Its leaders knew that power alone was not enough. Wisdom, patience, and preparation were equally essential. Citizens understood that unity and cooperation could achieve more than conflict, and the Council, humbled by its miscalculation, began a new era of diplomacy, one guided not by intimidation, but by mutual respect, careful planning, and recognition of humanity's unique strength. The galaxy had changed forever, and humanity's example would guide the stars for generations. The collapse of the ultimatum was not an end, but the beginning of a new era where preparedness, patience, and unity defined power, and where respect replaced fear as the foundation of galactic relations.